What's up guys, welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your host, Zach, and today's subreddit is r/TalesOfNeckBeards. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. This story is called A Gaming Shop Experience. So I've been lurking on this subreddit for a while, and I finally broke down and made an account because, frankly, I have too many neckbeard experiences, and my friends are tired of my salt. I am the textbook definition of beard bait, and have been ever since I turned 14, so going on 10 years now. I've been deep into the hellhole, which is anime, since ye olde days of Blockbuster Video. I love games of both the video and card varieties. I'm a regular con-goer and an avid cosplayer, so much so that I've migrated from just walking the floor in costume to competing and presenting at conventions. When not in cosplay, I eagerly experiment in other fun niche fashions such as steampunk, Mori Girl, and Lolita. Add to all that, my double major in environmental science and English literature, which covers both sides of the competing intellectual neckbeard factions, and a dollop of an overly bubbly demeanor, and you can see why I suffer an onslaught of Neckis beardicus. Seeing as this is my very first Reddit post in all of ever, I thought it would be prudent to start off with a low-key beard encounter that happened fairly recently. It goes a little something like this. So I play a somewhat uncommon trading card game. I say somewhat because trying to fight anything besides Magic, Pokemon, or Yu-Gi-Oh! At a store not specializing in cards is a shot in the dark, but I digress. And my favorite local store for it very recently closed. They do have a sister branch only 10 minutes away, but my branch was specifically the gaming branch of the store, and the sister branch doesn't have nearly enough stock or variety to keep me happy for long. So I have started a quest to find a new favorite store that isn't 1.5 hours away at the closest. In my most recent bout of frantic Googling, I found a store that was about 30 minutes away from me that I had never been to, and decided to try my luck. The store seemed pretty average when I pulled up in my car. It was your basic hole-in-the-wall at the end of a strip mall with the windows covered in so many gaming promotional posters that you can't even see in. Now, as I mentioned before, I have a pretty varied kind of fashion sense, but I treat trying out a new store a bit like a job interview. And I learned a long time ago not to make too heavy of an impression on the first encounter. So I was keeping it low-key but still very me, which meant basically a flowy sundress, a cardigan, and a bow headband. Hubba. Very cute, very girly, very not what people are used to seeing in a game shop. I was also alone for this quest. Not ideal, to be sure. I don't like going to game shops alone until I'm very comfortable there after years of bad experiences. But no one was free, and with how busy I am with work, I knew I wouldn't get another chance for a while. So, stealing my nerves, I left the car and proceeded with caution to the door. I knew immediately upon entering that I would once again come up empty in my search for the coveted TCGs. It was obvious that this shop's specialty was Warhammer. The only cards on display were a case of Magic and a smattering of Pokemon at the store counter, and the rest of the store was covered, floor to ceiling, in Warhammer memorabilia. Now, I have no problem with Warhammer. I can see the appeal, though I've never tried it myself, but it is very much not what I was looking for. My disappointment must have shown on my face because the cashier asked if there was anything he could help me with in a worried tone. I smiled politely and asked about my card game, and the guy hissed through his teeth in the way of every retail worker who knows they don't have something. I told him it was fine, but he was very sweet and offered to text some of the other shops he knows to see if anyone had stuff in stock. Honestly, I was touched and accepted his offer. I decided to look around the shop to see if there was anything there that caught my interest, because if the cashier was going to go out of his way for me, then I was going to buy something to make it worth his effort. I had just moved to the wall covered in various figures and paints to see if anything caught my eye. I think some look really neat when incorporated in steampunk props. Please don't witch hunt me over it. When the herd arrived, a whole bevy of beards shoved their way through the door of this little game shop. I'm talking 8 to 12 full-grown neckbeards of the most stringent definition. There were fedoras galore, black and red cargo pants covered in chains, At least 4 trench coats with ominous food splotches all over. Anime waifu shirts, even one ahegao shirt, ugh. A hearty mix of greasy ponytails and ill-conceived middle parts, and every single one of them had some form of beard on his neck. It was a gloriously horrifying sight. They all shuffled over to the tables at one side of the store, the one specifically made for Warhammer games, matches, toting with them boxes of figures as well as salty snacks and the illustrious dew of mountains. It was when they loudly started unloading their bounty of figures and munchies that I came to the realization that while they had been entering, the other 2 customers that had been in the shop when I had come in had exited. That left me alone in a game shop with a bunch of neckbeards and one distracted cashier. I felt a pit drop into my stomach. This was a cringeworthy, repressed memory in the making, and I already had enough of those to deal with, thank you very much. Luckily, at the moment, most of the herd hadn't noticed me yet, being too preoccupied with setting up what must be a weekly game to pay attention to anyone else in the store. I know many neckbeards have motion-based vision when it comes to prowling for my ladies, so if I just stood still, they wouldn't notice me. But eventually, one of the grease beasts would look up from his Cheetos and see a small girl in a dress, and then they would all be onto me. With a pit in my stomach, I came to the conclusion that my best chance of getting out of this unscarred was to make a break for the relative safety of nice cashier man and his close proximity to the door. I still wanted his intel, but if I needed to bolt, I was going to. I took a steadying breath and straightened my posture, putting on my best resting bitch face. I find looking like you could easily commit white-collar murder and not care is a good enough deterrent for the more lily-livered of beards. With that thought in mind, I slowly wandered back to the front counter, hugging the wall shelves and not letting my eyes stray over to the conglomerate over at the play tables. I made it to the counter with no issue, thank goodness, and found that the nice cashier guy was on the desk computer on Facebook with 5 messenger boxes open. He told me the first 3 places he tried also didn't stock it, the 4th one did, but they only had 1 box and he was still waiting on the last one to get back to him. But he had a good feeling. I thanked him profusely for his efforts and he asked me to wait for just a few more minutes to see if this other shopkeeper would respond. I reluctantly agreed to wait it out. I really didn't want to be in there with the horde any longer than necessary, but my thirst for those sweet, sweet cards won out. The cashier, bless him really, he was a gem, started talking to me about my favorite TCG. Just the basic, what decks I ran and why, if I'm casual or competitive, if I play any other trading card games or if it's just the one. I was happy to babble on to him about my cards. I got into it fairly recently and I run some fun but not meta decks. I'm pretty casual but do compete on occasion and managed to get to the regional tournament this year but didn't place. And that I used to be really competitive in Yu-Gi-Oh, but I switched to this after Yu-Gi-Oh stopped being fun for me. I was surprised that he actually knew a bit about the TCG, which was very cool, and that he had some options for some sleeves and dice that might complement my deck. I was so distracted by this conversation that I didn't notice the imminent beard encounter until it was too late. I smelled him before I saw him. My back was turned to the swarm as I was having my chat with the cashier, so I didn't notice it right away, that there was a sudden lack of chatter. I was halfway through a sentence about a particular card effect I enjoy using, when a stench the likes of which gym lockers can only aspire to hits my nostrils. Now, listen, I'm no shrinking violet when it comes to stink. I have 2 brothers that have been playing hockey since before I could walk and avoided showering before a big game because it was unlucky. I also had an internship in college that dealt primarily with amphibians and reptiles. Not exactly the most pleasant smelling of creatures. This smell, though, it was like the most rancid BO in a cat box that had never been emptied had a baby on a pile of garbage. I think my nose hairs melted back into my face. It was abominable. Ahem, a man said, far too close to my back for comfort, sneer audible in his voice. We're waiting to start, sir. There it was. The cringe was real, and I was deep in the thick of it. I straightened up from where I had been leaning against the counter and turned my head to witness the absolute bearditude that had graced us with his presence. This guy was presumably the Alpha Beard, based on the smug look on his face and the fact that all the other beardies were still sat at the table and looking on with horror and interest at what was about to go down. He was a ginger fellow in a pair of those Hot Topic pants with all the pockets and chains, and a heavy metal t-shirt stretched over his generous middle for a band that I'm too much of a pleb to know. The fedora on his head had a smattering of skull patches sloppily glued onto one side. I know it was glued too because it seeped out the sides of the patches, and a red craft store feather poking out of the other. He wasn't wearing a trench coat, but I kinda wish he had been because I could see his overgrown pit hair poking out of the sleeves of his shirt. His beard was patchy at best, missing his chin almost entirely and looking more like a scraggly pair of mutton chops got too big for their britches. Overall, a very grody sight to behold. I was still too surprised by the appearance of this person, still way too close to my back, to really understand what he'd said. Luckily for me, the cashier was unfazed. "Weekly 40K doesn't start for another 10 minutes, the cashier said without missing a beat. He pointed over his shoulder at the big digital clock on the wall. "When that clock hits 5, then I'll start taking names." "Everyone's here already," the great beard scoffed, flicking his chin up and making his hat's plumage bobble. "Stop cavorting with a female and get on with your proper duties. We won't be held up just because you mistakenly think you can score with this lost little waif." There was an honest-to-goodness gasp from the peanut gallery at the tables. I could tell from the bug eyes and open mouths that they hadn't expected that to come from their fearless leader here. I myself was feeling a little off-kilter. I mean, I'd never been called a waif before. Has anyone else gotten that one? I'm honestly curious. My shock quickly turned to embarrassed anger. I was so ready to rip this guy at least 2 new buttholes, but the cashier beat me to it. "I know I don't need to remind you about this store's conduct policies," he said venomously. Obviously, this wasn't his first clash with the Alpha Beard. "What you just said is completely unacceptable. I'm giving you your second strike. One more and you're out for the tournament season. Now, if you want to play it all today, you're gonna go sit down and shut up while I help out this paying customer that was here before you. And I'll start 40K when she's done with her purchases." This got the beardy all kinds of steamed up. His face turned so red he looked like a ripe tomato. With how ginger he was, it almost looked like his head was on fire. Truly, it was a sight. It was clear he wanted to escalate the situation, but his gang of groupies realized a losing fight when they saw it and begged him to come back to the table. He gave me one last glare. I'm sure it would have been intimidating if his bottom lip hadn't been quivering ever so slightly, before turning on his heel and stomping like a toddler back to his seat and flopping into it with a jiggle. "I'm so sorry about that," the cashier said to me quietly. "My little sister has to deal with the same thing when she goes to Pokemon tournaments, and I hate it. That store got back to me though, and they do have your game in stock. They also have a weekly tournament for you if you're interested in that. It's just a bit of a drive." "Thank you for the help," I said, with the cards, and also with him. "If you really want to thank me, pretend to shop for something for a minute," he said with a mischievous grin. "I want to make them wait a bit." I happily spent the next 30 minutes loudly hemming and hawing over dice and sleeves. I even had him take out the Yu-Gi-Oh singles so I could look through their collection, audibly discussing different strategies I could implement if so-and-so card was added to my deck. Through it all, the Alpha Neckbeard sat, getting redder and redder in his seat, the gaggle of subbeards switching between looking at him worriedly and then to me as I flexed my little bit of nerd knowledge with the cashier. I left the shop with a new set of oversleeves, about $25 in rares to start a Link Summon Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and the pinkest, most glittery dice they carried in stock, along with the address of the next shop in my quest for card games. On my way out, I made a point of telling the cashier that I would be sure to tell all my friends that played Warhammer to check out that shop. After all, it seemed that their usual weekly group could do with a bit more feminine ingenuity. I ducked out of there with the sound of a furious at my heels as the Alpha Beard finally lost it. I haven't been back since, but I'm so curious to know if he got that last strike or not. Okay, hold up. First off, you had me at sundress, okay? I'm no better than the Beardos at this point. Like, seriously, Barney Stinson, he opened my eyes to the wonderful world of women in sundresses. Amazing. I'm not trying to be creepy, I can like things. Okay, anyways, Beardo, wow. How embarrassing would it be just being him for a day? Like, just the dramatic body language that he is conveying, or at least she makes it seem like he conveys, is just ridiculous and funny, and like, you can tell he wouldn't act as badass without his posse of poon slayers. Here we have a little tiny little fart of a story called A Conversation with My Cousin. Not really a story, way to contradict me. But both of us have had experiences with neckbeards hitting on us or being creepy. I briefly dated one when I was about 19 or 20, although I was not really aware of the term at that age. Anyways, we both came to a sudden realization when we were driving to the mall one day. We both meet the criteria of what is considered neckbeard bait. Our physical appearance for one thing, short, curvy, large chest, baby-faced with larger eyes. Also, we are both the same type of women that this type of guy would look at and assume we are not like other girls. She's into video games and dresses in a thrift store chic kind of style. I'm a metalhead with tattoos who likes some nerdy things, not heavily though. Not fun being fetishized as a person. Anyone else experience this? And that brings me to my question here. How many of you guys regularly deal with beards? Or not beards, but neckbeards. I've asked this before, but I figure the audience is a little bit different this time. So let me know. Ever had to deal with incessant beardetry? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.